Watching this little guy across from the bus station, the stance, the wide stance of his arms make him look like he's saying, this is my territory and I'll be glad to dispute it with anybody. But on the other hand, he's just filled with curiosity. Well, it seems to be abandoned by that railroad track, but it's not abandoned. I don't know if that's where I'm going or not. Driving a bus through these towns is like threading a needle. Oftentimes there are people who double park and he has to pump the horn and get them to come out and move. That's the way it is. That may be the castle of Larissa. Here, a top-down view of a model of Mycenae. You enter from the lower left at the Lion Gate. Number 2 is the Grave Circle A, and then the Citadel up on top. And then up here somewhere in the left-hand corner of that rectangle is the spring that I walked down to underground. A diagram of where we have been. We walked around from right to left, clockwise around that circle, and now we're standing about in here. Here we're about ready to enter the ancient city of Mycenae. Probably begun its occupation around the 16th century BC. I think these walls were built in about 1350 BC. Quite large blocks. I don't know that these are as heavy, as conglomerate as the huge blocks moved by the Incas. Impresses is how close together they are, and yet not at all equal to the Inca stone. Some of that could be erosion, but also you'll notice how structurally they filled it in with rocks. You don't see that with the Inca. I'll shoot the entry just so I can say I shot it, but there are better pictures on the internet. I do wonder what that little hole up there is. There's a dispute as to whether these are lions, griffins, or something else. Notice the standard holes. They were on top and they would have been on bottom to hold the swinging doors. They're kind of like the hinges of those days. And then these slots here would have held the crossbar. Wonder if this is just something hollowed out in present time. Although it does look like it had an intended construction. The famous burial plot, Group A, discovered by Schielman on his second visit. And there, we'll try and get in there later when the tour groups are not in there. I do wonder what this passageway was. Perhaps I can reread the book and find out. It's pretty obvious, though. It runs all the way around. It was in this pit here, I believe, in several of the shaft graves. And those are graves that were just literally shafts built down into the stone, I think. It's in here that the magnificent finds were made by Schielman that are now in the Athens National Archaeological Museum. And my goal is to simply document it, see it, charisma of place, if you will. From your viewpoint, do not rely on what I say. Go read something. It's incredibly available. Far more accurate than you get from me. I don't have the time. Notice the two different kinds of construction. That one over there, small, cycloptic, if you will, wall. And then the rest of it just normal stone. Probably evidencing different periods of time, if not restoration periods. This apparent passageway is what's intriguing. I really do need to find out what this is. Passing to the side over to this section here. Again, I think this is a grave site. These buildings here, these spaces here, all wrap this round tomb area. As you can see, I'll pan with the camera and you'll see that I'm moving right. My camera now is facing the entrance, or the lion gate. I'm intimidated by people since he's constantly inundated with crowds. Now once again peering down into this circular tomb area. Whether this space here represents a shaft, I don't know. This rooms as we enter is by modern convention I think called the granary, but pretty much assumed that it really wasn't that, but rather it was a place where perhaps soldiers hung out, or those walkways. And here's this like separate little space right here. Was it literally a space, or did it serve some other function? Located here on this side. Here, that walkway, here another shaft, still within the circular area. But here you can see the height as this walkway rises up here a bit in height. Probably 6.5, maybe 7.5 foot high stones, slabs. Here's the interesting rampway up towards the upper part of the citadel. When if I leave through there, I may be able to see grooves in the base of that entry from chariots. See them now because that's covered over. So, a diagram of where we have been. We walked around from right to left, clockwise around that circle. Now we're standing right up about in here. Just walked up to the great ramp. We're looking down into these Hellenistic chambers. Now, from this vantage point, for I forget how many years, 500 to 1,000 years, Mycenae dominated trade not only by land but by sea, because this apparently was where trade routes necessarily had to go. It seems strange to me that could be the case. We're too far from the sea, it seems like there's alternate ways that trade could go, but my guess is that from this bastion they could control by moving armies where they wanted them. We'll start moving up higher towards where the king's castle is. Pretty display of flowers. Climb up, we can see the wall and level system for defense, as well as probably residences and so forth. Of course, in a state of rubble now, simply labeled north quarter and buildings on the north slope. So I may stop here on my way and take a closer look. Just like the Acropolis, this is the propylon of this palace. However, it does not appear to be right here. So exactly where it was, I don't know. But we continue up. On the other hand, here are some what look like column bases and a few large stones. So perhaps it was in this orientation that we have right here. We have a little bit more of a restored wall system and an interpretive site here. The palace complex. I suspect that we're down here somewhere, though it doesn't really tell us. But notice you've got one building here. This was a worshipping place, I believe, for sacrifices and so forth. And I think the king's seat was there, throne seat was there. So maybe we'll see evidence of those pillars. Entered in here, so we're now wandered up to about into here somewhere. Apparently was where we're going to go. That diagram we saw, two pillars. Those may represent where those room with two pillars were, which would suggest that that would be where the king's throne was. And over there would have been, and you can see one of the four pillars beyond that little building through the screening. This is where Agamemnon and his family and other rulers would have lived. This interpretive panel suggests that we have temples that used to be up on the very crest of the hill here. There's some legitimate remnant of that. I don't know, but you can see a reasonable general flattening of this surface up here. The best thing is to get a sense of the protection of this site. First of all, by the sheer mass of that mountain there, and this other one that I'll pan by right now, and the steepness of the sides of these hills. The only place that really was accessible was where the Lion Gate is, which makes perfect sense. But nevertheless, it's a very high pinnacle. The east side, things I think is very interesting about this site from an archaeological viewpoint, in a generalized way, I guess, is that Schliemann and the others did not have to do a lot of excavating of the blow-in fill that you see almost in every other site around the world. Rome, Athens, wherever. And I've often pointed out when I've been standing above or on the grade of the original site, the difference between those two grades. Here, there wasn't. There was no fill-in up here, probably because of its windy pinnacle position. Just a few blocks, somewhat identifiable as legitimate stones of the constructions that would have been here. Would this have been a wall? Perhaps. That certainly looks like a column base, doesn't it? More important, or equally important to being here for Charisma of Place, is to visit the National Archaeological Museum and see the tremendous finds that were made here. People that come here, and the old, but the young in particular, you hope that having been here, they have an innate now sensitivity to the history they may learn about or be exposed to. Again, we're right up in here somewhere, and I'm going to continue down through here, I hope, and get to this area, because I really want to see that cistern that's there. The north quarter I'm going to go to before I go to where the cistern is, which is on the eastern side. Little square room, could have been storage or a cistern or something. We've got a trench of some sort, again probably for sewage drainage. Or water, well, maybe water from the cistern. Same thing there, again, another little round building or room. Rooms may well have just been storage rooms for the families or whatever that use these spaces here. These look like stairways down into here, into this room. How that they could have imagined that the spaces they use so glibly as their homes or offices would one day be oohed and hawed and filled with flowers. There are no paths to walk, so we're reduced to doing what we're not usually supposed to do at sites. That's walk on the stones. I'll stop right here. Could get dicey. As you can see, these are some pretty significant buildings. Look at that one down there, how tall the walls are. And their vantage point of the king's quarters. Now again, in this walled town or citadel. It was only those who were close to the king or supportive of the king directly that occupied these other areas here within the walls. The normal people who did normal things, probably the cooks and so forth, lived outside in little mini communities. It's fun to traipse through these old ruins of perhaps people's homes. This is that. It looks pretty deep, like it could be a well. Any structure like this, anywhere I've seen, any space that's available within the walls is ultimately filled and redone over and over again over time. These rooms here were storerooms according to this interpretive sign. Before us is apparently the House of Columns, which I guess is that one right there that looks like it has columns. But it looks like other structures have been built over it. So that's probably the case. Well, not because we can see any evidence of the columns, but the archaeologists probably dug down, found column bases to indicate that it was an earlier construction with columns. The way the dirt in the floor of the storage units would indicate different kinds of seeds. Now here we do have column bases and a lizard. He was going to attack, but I warded him off with probably my looks. And there another column and another column base. Must wonder what it was like to live in these places. Cooler in the summer than down below. Maybe a sense of security. But maybe the burden of having to leave this citadel and go off into the hills or whatever to find your water and your game and farm. Those little villages I saw in China that were cut out of stone are an analogy to that. No slouch of a rock up here that had to be important enough to be hauled up here. You see that conglomerate nature of this. I wonder if it is heavier or lighter than marble. Here we get a sense of the impregnability of the cliff sides of this citadel, enhanced even more so by the structures on it. The large stone here. Then a little street that went along the edge here, giving access down into those areas. Haven't a clue. Imagine that any time in the last 3,000-4,000 years, people could have stood here or somewhere near this site and ate breakfast or had watched the sun go down and its effect on these hills. And could they have worshipped the outline of that human on that hill? Or did they see it like I see it? Large stone looks like it would have been an entryway. Yes, it would. See these holes right here? They would have held those bottom pivoting ends of the one side of the door that would have swung open. Two doors, one to the right, one to the left. By having that indentation there, it prevented the door from swinging outside, if that was the point. It was identified as building Gamma, one building. Would that have been a family unit or some like mini political unit? Or just a multiple unit? Have much room, more room than the Anasazi had at Chaco Canyon or many of the other sites that you see. Maybe people were content with small spaces. For the record, this is referred to as Delta area. Like just plain outer walls, but again, notice how the construction includes smaller rocks. So the real challenge was moving the rocks and getting them in place. This would have been another entryway here. Of course, we'll find out more when I get down below. When I was coming, I took the junction that goes to the left and up higher, because I want to go through this doorway here, I think. Unless it takes me too quickly out. Yes, it does. So I'll retrace. But notice again the big blocks here of stone. And again, a little side door. Normally, the side door room had to be for soldiers. An attempt to replicate how these doors were constructed so that you have a good idea. They're using metal instead of wood at the base to give it longevity, but looking over the top we can see how it actually worked. And using this method you could have almost any size door you wanted. Now, what strategies they use to make it pivot easily, because some of these doors I've seen are huge, as are some of these rocks. Now here they fit quite nicely, don't they? Yet still filled in with stone, whereas the Inca would have cut those stones absolutely perfectly, and they were hard stones to cut. Looking at the wall, exterior wall, as an invader would have to look at it. The irony of it is there were lots of crevices with which to get a handhold. Most fortresses would not allow that. The lizard enjoying his front row seat of the excitement of a mob of people coming down. Instead of being frightened, this is entertainment. Somewhere down here I'd like to be able to look into the cistern. It may be this part that's gated. Some of the cisterns I've been in have been downright dangerous. The area that we've just walked through was the third and last extension around 1350 BC, whose primary function was to secure the water source, a spring that flows, continues to flow from what I read today. And also there were these two corbelled entrances and exits to the fortress. To know what kind of defense strategies they had for these entrances. Did they fill them with rocks or what? This, of course, is one of the cisterns. It was my understanding there was a cistern that was inside the mountain itself. This is the underground cistern here. So we'll go down and take a look at that. Apparently it's a diagram of how it works. So I guess we're going to enter and go down these stairs. See that part way down here is another stone archway. And here a left angled 90-degree turn. So I'll get my light out now. Now here I'm using my little hat light. And it's got a post indicating there's some support here for this. So I'll continue down here a little ways. Here there are two 90-degree turns to the right, taking us back in the same direction we were coming down those stairs at first. And I'm going to be stopping right now because I don't care to go any farther. But you can see how long that is, and it may turn right behind me. But this is pretty interesting. One of the main issues for a fort under siege is water. As you know, we can go for at least 72 days without much food, but only about 3 days without any water. So that's that circular burial area at the entrance, and I'm just panning because beyond the area I saw before, buildings wrap even further around, and you can see the continuation of that wall. That gives a little idea of how far down this slope the citadel went. This was the cult center. I don't know, although there's an interpretive sign above it. I don't know if it's alluding to that or to this area up in here. I'm guessing that these are some original mud-based buildings that are being protected because they still exist a bit. So is the first stage of the wall. The second stage, you notice it's been enlarged if you compare the two. And here the final stage, and I think this represents that extension we looked at over here where the cistern is. In fact, that may be the cistern right there. It's called the Lion Tholos Tomb. And as I pan around, not only do we notice those very large blocks up there, which presumably went, well, I think maybe they were just for that arch, but you'll notice you can see the outline, the curvature here of what ultimately was a beehive design, done what looks like either stone cut very nicely or brick. I'm thinking those are stones. Here, the archway into it, notice that those stones, if they may be one big stone, that's pretty impressive stuff, and nicely worked. Very nicely worked. You can barely make out that beehive design here. Tomb that we saw, the entryway, and then this part that's right in front of us now. Kind of a mini propylae or propylon. These stones were four, but they were worked well. It'd be interesting to know what the technology is for building a beehive structure, given how difficult it was for Lesky to design and build the Florence dome. And what in its day would have been an impressive entryway. Pedestals indicating that probably there were large statues here, and probably some kind of statue up inside there. Also notice that that's a triangular piece of rock sitting out, so it probably formed a niche for another statue of some sort. What goes in there, we can't. I don't know if the individual stones are curved or not. My guess is they probably are, because they're about 3 to 4 feet in length. Well, this is what that would have looked like from the outside. We couldn't see any evidence of this, to my knowledge. So there we have a view. You can see the rectangle platform, if you will, of the king's compound. And down here in the lower right hand corner of the screen are the foundations, I believe, as well as cascading up that hill, or down it rather, are probably the ordinary people's homes. And then they would have migrated up each day to do their work up there. I wonder if they encountered the same issue at any point in time that we have in modern society of residential and developed areas consuming what may be agricultural areas. And this looks like it could perhaps be agriculture. It gives us a pretty good idea of the steepness of that and the depth of that canyon also that surrounds at least this east side section of homes, or structures at least, further up the side of this hill, opposite the citadel. And it looks like a well-made well of some sort there, maybe a cistern. Pretty countryside once you get out away from most of humanity. Here, a simple little church, probably the simplest I've ever seen. Just down the road, a road traveled apparently just for the church and occasionally for these olive groves down from the parking area for Mycenae. Now that road I followed past that church, and it is used fairly frequently, but I think primarily for servicing these olive trees. You can see that they've done some tractor work on the ground. Apparently that's necessary once in a while, but here they've left it pretty open, so we'll walk up to this point. A pretty bucolic scene. These slopes have had a lot of work probably put into them over the century or so, or centuries, to plant these olive trees. Rugged land, but it works. This is the western gate into this castle. Well, it's probably, given the castle's orientation, the eastern gate, but I saw it the other night. My goal now, at the end of today, is to climb up to the top of that castle. Another version of the lion's gate and that motif. Building, which looks like a hotel, looks completely abandoned. It's in between these two fortresses. It has a spectacular view, which you think would have given it business credibility, but apparently not. And this entrance to this fortress, not the one I'm climbing, also has that motif up on top. Don't really know how old this is. Now I'm inside the castle. We'll climb up there in a few minutes. Get as high up as I can, then I know everything else is downhill.